everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Smart Networks Expert Talk Show series. My name is Sandeep Banga, and I'm going to be your host for the session today. And I'm very excited to actually be conducting this interview because today I'm joined by a very, very special guest and a very well-known face in the telecom world, Mr. Timothy Boyd. Now, to those who haven't had the pleasure of interacting with Tim before, Tim is a seasoned veteran in the telecom world, and in his current role, he is the Vice President of Transformation for Telia Company. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Sandeep. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Tim. What about yourself?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. It's
Perfect.
nice sunny day
Awesome.
in winter in Sweden, so it's good.
Awesome. And it's really great to have you on board, Tim. Now, as we all know, the telecom world is going through a very exciting phase as we move to the evolution of mobile technologies from the current 4G towards the future 5G era. And this is a transformation which is happening in many parts of the world right now. Of course, the opportunities and the possibilities that come with 5G have been explored in great detail across many industry forums, so on and so forth. But in this conversation, we're looking at doing things a little differently. We're looking at flipping the table and looking at the other side of things, and getting Tim's insights to understand what are some of the challenges that telcos are going to face in this road to 5G, and what are some of the solutions and strategies they need to have in place to ensure that they have a smooth journey towards the 5G future. Now, before we get into these details, I'm going to look towards Tim, and for our viewers who haven't had the chance to meet with Tim, Tim, would you please give us a quick introduction of yourself and your current role at Telia?
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. So, and I agree. I think there's some interesting challenges ahead for all of us, but they're not new challenges. I mean, historically, if I look back for myself, we as an industry kind of got quite good at doing voice at a point in time, and then in the mid kind of 3G era, all of a sudden it became this data business, and we had to learn to adapt and scale. And we've gone from this era of basic data through smartphones all the way through to kind of 10x, and now we're kind of in this period of 1000x. It's a very interesting time for the industry. My focus has always been around growth and scale. So how do we look to new technologies, and how do we look at new business and operating models to adapt to that growth and look for new products and services across a couple of countries now. But yeah, I think it's a hugely exciting time for the industry, and something that I think we all should be a bit excited about rather than concerned about some of the challenges. I think they're just the nature of the industry that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree with you. But with you being in the mobile industry for so many years, in your perspective, could you provide us an overview of what your journey and Telia's journey has been towards how you're seeing the network and customer experience evolving over the last 5 years? Because the last 5 years have actually been very, very exciting, and there have been years of change. So how has the network and in terms of customer experience evolved?
Yeah, I think one of the key changes is this push to make it more individual in terms of the experience. So, as I say, I think historically we've done very well at scale, and what I mean by that is essentially we can provide a service for everyone, but not for anyone individually. And so there's been a big kind of push of as much capacity for lowest cost per gig as we can get, getting capacity out ahead of time rather than just in time, and getting it out to kind of the broader spectrum as opposed to individuals and then business users that need it. So I think what we're seeing now is that baseline's in, and we've done a pretty good job there. We have a new challenge with 5G for sure, but ultimately that's infrastructure and spectrum. Now we need to look at how can we get and take some of those more IT-centric considerations about personalization at scale and these kind of concepts, and extrapolate them all the way through to the network to create individual experiences for our users. And it's a big shift, right? It requires a different approach on right down to how we build and design the networks to make sure that we're getting the right information at the right time, and that we're driving capacity and performance in our networks to the right services. So it's a very interesting shift. I think if I look back historically, we've had the promise of some of these things over the years. If I go back 10 years to the early days of SON, it was going to be all things to everyone at the radio layer, and I don't think we quite got there as an industry. But when you look forward now at some of the kind of exciting software solutions that are coming out, but also some of the ways that virtualization is changing our network infrastructure, I think those opportunities are now existing more than ever, and we should be starting to take advantage of those for the benefit of our customers.
Right, right. And you also mentioned, there are a lot of investments towards infrastructure and so on that need to be made towards this journey towards 5G, which essentially means that, the entire 5G roadmap comes with a lot of a massive amount of capex investments, right? And at the same time, you have exponentially, rise in data demand, as well as a huge rise in customer expectations towards, personalization and so on and so forth. So in this current landscape, how do telcos manage cost effectively to meet this new demand? And this happens to be at a time when revenues are flatlining or in some cases declining. So what are the cost effective or rather cost efficiency strategies telcos need to have in place?
Yeah, I think so. So I think firstly, I'm an optimist. I think there's revenues. I think they can grow. I think we've got a great product and a great industry and a bunch of new opportunities. But having said that, I think there's several things that we need to focus on, and we have to be absolutely brilliant at. And the first is simplification. So making sure that the infrastructure we're putting out is simple. And what I mean by that is we have a very complex set of networks that we've historically built over time based on the technology that existed, and we need to start to simplify. And the reason for that is our next phase for our businesses is to then automate. So as long as we can get the infrastructure in a way that's common sense and practical, we can then start to automate those services, which frees us up to start to invest in those personal experiences that we were talking about before. The third big shift is software in the network. We're reaching a kind of, I think, a tipping point where software is starting to become the dominant player inside the network as opposed to the physical infrastructure itself. And we see that through 5G and technologies like beamforming, where for the first time, at a radio level, we're putting so much spectrum onto these sites now that it changes our whole dynamic of planning. And it's beyond the basics of the original planning team, so we need to start to invest more heavily in how we design these networks as opposed to the investment going into physical infrastructure itself. So it's a big dynamic shift. I think that's why you're seeing some of the new investment models come out, because we're looking at having to free up capex to move it into different areas than we've traditionally otherwise done it. The fourth point is how we take that software and we turn it into planning. So I spoke about customer experience in a timely fashion, not in a fashion of kind of 5 years ahead of the capacity curve. And to do that really well and to drive the right kind of investment return, we need to have solutions that allow us to plan just in time and get that deployment and capacity out just in time. And I think we're starting to see really good technology come through on that front. So yeah, I think it's a combination of things, but like most of these things, it starts with simplicity. It ends in good technology investment and the softwareization of the networks for sure.
Right. So now, you brought quite a few insights. So let's take it one by one. I'm just going to move into your talk about, how the networks are now becoming even more complex. And this is something that's not going to change. So how do CSPs manage this increasing network complexity, which we are currently seeing right now, Tim?
Yeah, and I think it's going to get worse, not better. I mean, the irony is the infrastructure at a kind of site level is slightly simpler. There's less cables, right? Because we're using fibers, but from what we used to. But we're certainly deploying more spectrum than we ever have, far more radio units, and I think that just adds on a physical basis more complexity to our sites, which is why you start to see more and more sharing coming through over time. On top of that, there's a different approach to densification needed to provide some of the 5G services as SA starts to become more prominent across our networks. And so we need to start planning in a different way and start acquiring sites and doing different types of partnering models to get access to new areas of coverage. And I think the third one is the nature of the spectrum. So as we start to see the bands come in above 6 gig, we need to plan differently for our networks. And so I think all these things combined mean we have a different physical build, physical demand linked to our kind of spectrum holdings. And as a consequence, we then need to start to plan differently. So planning becomes quite critical in this process. I think the fourth dynamic is industry and government, where we have a need to, where, as you mentioned, we have an expectation set on us in terms of the performance of these networks, of what 5G will be, but that can't be delivered in isolation of the telcos. We need support from government to change the approach on deployment of services and how we deploy, but also partnering with industry to create these new products and services is critical, which means from our perspective, we need networks that are open, that are able to be highly secure, but able to be integrated to create new products and services. And we also need the ability for our products and services to be defined in a way that our customers have the personalization and flexibility that they're desiring and they're needing. So you start to think about how you slice your network and how you provide different products and services. And then we need to assure all these things. And I think that's one of the key ones where, traditionally assurance has been probing the network to get to kind of that. We've looked at our networks traditionally at a service level. So, are we providing good infrastructure, good voice, good data? To get that down to an individual customer is a very complex task, particularly if you take a historic approach at architecting the network. So I think all this gets unlocked over time, but it's going to take some time, huge investment, and definitely a different way of thinking about how we define our services and how we organize our teams around these services.
Right. Right. Thanks, Tim. And a lot of insights coming in. So let me try and make an attempt to kind of combine a lot of what you're saying. And towards my next question which would be, how can telcos derive the right balance of network investment, customer experience, and profitability? And what are some of the tools and methods, in your opinion, which can help telcos achieve the balance between these three aspects?
Yeah, so I think it's understanding the first one, right? So at a basic network level, really understanding what your sites and what your network is doing in terms of revenue and performance and cost, I think is the first piece of insight. The second is understanding what your customers want, where they are, and what services they need, so that you can ensure you're funneling your investments into the right area, speaking purely in a financial sense. And then the third is, how do you build effectively a delivery organization, an operations organization that can do that in the most efficient way? And that's where we start to see planning being so critical to what it is we do as a business. And then, so you've built that, how do you then optimize? So performance inside that network, ensuring that you are getting the most out of the investment from a data capacity and throughput point of view. And we start to see technologies in our networks now where we are going almost back in time to these days of video compression back in the 3G era. And we're starting to see far smarter solutions at solving data inside our network, not just through our network. And I think that's a real critical shift that we'll see grow and grow, particularly as virtualization becomes bigger and bigger. We're moving through containerization now, like most companies, and on our network side. And it's an interesting new challenge, but at the same time, it has so much possibility for what we do. But then coming back to your point, planning and operations of the network change exponentially as a consequence. And so we need to reskill and we need to invest in new tools. So I think very much traditionally we're focused on the physical infrastructure because that's been the crux of the business on the network side. And now the investment for me is far more focused on the software side than it ever has been, because it's critical for our success. If you assume your network software base, a larger portion of your investment has to go towards software by default, right? So I think that's one of the big changes we're seeing right now. And through that investment, we will obviously drive our customer experience.
Perfect. Now, so Tim, going by what you said, just backtracking a bit from a 5G perspective, you said service is important, and on this other side, software is critical. Now, what new solutions do operators have handy towards managing customer experience of the new services and use cases which 5G are going to bring. For example, low latency services, network slicing, and IoT.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those areas that's fast evolving, and I think there's a series of opportunities the networks have in these areas. But again, it's going to come down to how well as an industry we can build out these products and services in a way that's fairly consistent. One of the big challenges is going to be everyone wants to create the new product and service for 5G for this new use case. But one of the good things I think historically on networks is 3GPP. And we've been able as an industry to standardize quite well. And I don't think we should lose sight of that through this kind of virtualization and heavy softwareization phase. I think it's critical to our success as an industry. And so when I take a look back, I think the big thing that's going to change is moving from this understanding of our networks that we've had today at a service level down to an individual level. And that's a big shift. And I think there's a couple who have done it well. In terms of the software, we have investments that we need to make that I think all operators need to make. Again, it comes back to the software is critical to driving that individual experience and looking at our service, not just from a network perspective, but end to end across our entire customer touchpoint experience. So when you think about a couple of years ago in a broader conversation, we're talking about omni-channel, we're now talking about personal channel. So how do we make that experience individual all the way through to network performance? And then we start to move into, as you say, slicing and all these new technologies. And we need to understand what those services are. We need to be able to assure and define and sell those services. But more importantly, we need happy customers who themselves can consume and understand that service as our customers more increasingly become businesses and machines. So it's a big shift, but it's one that I think all of us have to make, but I think the industry is shifting there pretty quickly. Again, it comes down to the data and the quality of the information you have. So architecture of our networks and the software we choose becomes critical to how we do this.
Right. And there's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of buzz around artificial intelligence. In fact, being part of the marketing team, it's something we consider like the holy Bible to solve every issue. And it's moving from what once was a fancy word to now actually becoming table stakes. And in some form, you can't think of having a successful journey towards 5G without having some AI or ML approach in place, right? Now, what is your opinion on the role and significance of artificial intelligence or machine learning that comes in the 4G to 5G journey? And you mentioned how software is such a critical element. How is artificial intelligence and machine learning going to take software to the next level?
Yeah, I think it's probably the secret solution sitting in the back of this conversation, right? I mean, we haven't seen a huge amount of it through 4G. If you take it back to basics, 3G to 4G was the RPA era. We were automating the processes as opposed to driving intelligent services. I think now we're starting to see the first use cases of really intelligent automation. Whether that's machine learning yet, that's jury's out, but I think we'll get there over time. But the ability to see, I think the main use case, we're just focused the conversation, the main use cases that we're using are all in operations, because that's where it's most important to our customers. We're now starting to consider how we plan using AI and ML, which is a really exciting area for me because of, say, the demand on those teams is now exponential to where it was before. It was always a tough gig. Now it's super, super hard. And we need to provide ways and tools to help those teams drive better experiences for our customers in the most efficient way. So you're starting to see the first of those use cases coming through, which I think is brilliant. We will then start to see more and more services layering up and layering up and layering up. And the question is, how do you use AI and ML to drive these sorts of things going forward? And I think that's incumbent on businesses like yourself to start to help us there as we try and unravel this complexity. But we can't get away from the fact that whilst all these wonderful services are being defined and built, the underlying network infrastructure needs to be as simple as possible so we can take advantage of these services as they come through. And I think that secret is the way forward for everyone. Uh, so yeah, I think it's plays a huge role. Uh, and if we can get the basics right there, we then start to be able to leverage that at the product level as well, which becomes quite critical for us. Obviously, we have a big industry business and a big enterprise business. Creating those future products and services off the basis of an AI platform is really critical. But to do that, we have to get it into the network in a smart, safe, and secure way.
Right. So I completely agree with you on all these points, Tim. You know, it is extremely essential in an entire network investment process that the entire elements of network and business now can't be treated as isolated elements, but now need to combine in order to ensure both a profitable network investment plan and the right kind of strategy towards a 5G rollout. And thanks a lot for your insights, Tim. And just as a way to conclude this interview, for our audience, is there any advice you'd like to give any of these operators who are kind of looking at, beginning their journey towards 5G? And according to you, what are the three key areas which these operators would need to focus on in their 5G rollout process?
Yeah, I think if you want to break it down to three areas, again, it comes back to simplification of the network. I mean, you just we live through. I always say to everyone, we got away with 4G, and I think with 5G, we've now got to actually go back to brilliant basics and just make sure that our infrastructure is sound for the future. The second is go early on softwareization. From my point of view, it's there, and we should be driving it as heavily as we can. And until we do that, we won't get the third, which is just a ruthless focus on customer experience, because we won't understand our customer enough. And I think if you take those 3 points and you put them in order, you end up with a brilliant business that can drive efficiently investments to the right parts of its network to drive those brilliant customer experiences. And so really doubling down on software investment is, for me, the key to solution going forward.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tim, for those insights and for your time. I'm sure all our viewers are actually going to take a lot of information from this, and really appreciate you coming on board for this interview.
No problem. Thanks, Edu.
Perfect. And to everyone who's watching at home, thank you so much for your time, and stay tuned for more from Subex and from the Smart Networks Expert Talk Show series. Cheers.